A 72-year-old black grandmother walked into court over a porch violation. The judge expected silence, compliance, maybe an apology. What he got was a war he wasn't ready for. Earlene Mae Jackson? The court clerk said it like she was reading a joke someone slipped into the docket. Then, half under her breath, "You sure this one's in the right courtroom?" The gallery snickered. The bailiff didn't blink. And Judge Winston Harlan didn't even bother to look up. He was busy sipping lukewarm coffee and pretending his robe made him God. Then she stood, 5 feet tall, 72 years old, wrapped in a paisley headscarf, orthopedic shoes, and a look that said, "I buried a husband, survived Jim Crow, and taught 3 kids to read. Don't test me." She didn't shuffle. She arrived, with a cane that tapped like a metronome for justice and a purse held tight. Not out of fear, but out of habit formed during decades of being underestimated. The officer by the door, new, nervous, and too proud of his badge, stepped forward like she was a threat. "Ma'am, I'll need to take your cane." She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just said, "You can take it, baby, but be gentle. It's got more spine than this building." Even the stenographer choked on a laugh. Harlan's eyes finally lifted. Annoyed, the courtroom settled into an uneasy silence, the kind that drips from ceilings and crawls down spines. Earlene reached the defense table and sat down like she was settling into her own front porch, which was, ironically, why she was here. Her violation? A non-standard awning over a porch she'd had since Reagan was in office. 42 years in the same house. Through redlining, inflation, urban renewal, and the city's latest obsession with beige stucco and artisan dog parks. And now, without so much as a warning call, she'd been fined $20,000. No inspection, no hearing, just a cold letter from the city. Worse, they spelled her name wrong. Earlene Jackson. She tried to correct it. The clerk laughed. "You sure you ain't confusing yourself with someone else, Miss Jackson?" And now here she was. Judge Harlan cleared his throat. "Ms. Jackson," he said, dragging out the Ms. like it personally offended him. "You are in violation of Municipal Code 47A. The citation is valid. The fine stands. This court sees no reason to delay enforcement." Earlene didn't blink. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. Gently, like it was a weapon loaded with truth. "Your Honor," she said, voice calm and clipped like a scalpel. "I'm sorry, but I didn't walk in here for decoration. And unless I've missed something, this is still a courtroom, not a plantation." Silence. Real silence. Not the polite kind. The kind that sucks the oxygen from the walls. Earlene didn't care. "I may not have your degrees. I may not have your titles. But I've got something older than this bench and meaner than your pride." She tapped the folder. "It's called the truth." And right then, for the first time all morning, Judge Harlan sat back. Because she hadn't just entered the courtroom. She declared war in one sentence flat. Judge Harlan blinked like someone had just slapped the entitlement off his face. Did that elderly black woman just compare his courtroom to a plantation? Yes. Yes, she did. And now his ego, well-fed, rarely challenged, always flattered, was rattling like bad plumbing in an old courthouse. He leaned forward. Slow, controlled, condescending. "Ms. Jackson," he said, stretching her name like it owed him rent. "This is a court of law. You are not here to perform." Earlene tilted her head. "Oh, bless your heart," she said. "You think this is a performance? Sugar, if I were performing, I'd bring better lighting and a tambourine. This is survival. Raw and unpretty." A sharp exhale escaped the gallery. Half gasp, half smothered laughter. Harlan's nostrils flared. He was losing the room and he knew it. But what he didn't know was how fast it was unraveling. "You're here to respond to a violation," he snapped. "Not make speeches." "Violation," Earlene echoed. "Child, the only thing violated here is logic." She opened her folder and pulled out a weathered document, yellowed at the edges like an old promise. Exhibit A. My original building permit. Dated 1989. Approved. Signed. Filed. Back when cities still had souls. The judge glanced at it, barely. That doesn't account for the recent update to Municipal Code 47A. Ah, yes. Early nodded. The update no one in my zip code was informed about. The one quietly slipped through under the aesthetic modernization clause. She held up another sheet. You know what else changed that year? The real estate value in my neighborhood. Right after y'all put in a bike lane and a wine bar no one asked for. Boom. The gallery was leaning in now like churchgoers hearing the first honest sermon in years. This isn't about an awning, she continued, calm as a hurricane's eye. It's about making old things disappear quietly. People like me, we don't fit the new vision, do we? We ruin the resale photos. Judge Harlan adjusted his robe like it could hide the sweat pooling under his collar. This court is not interested in your theories. Erlene raised an eyebrow. Course you're not. Theories require listening. And you've already decided that anything I say is just noise interrupting your schedule. She leaned forward just enough to freeze the temperature in the room. But let me be real clear, Your Honor, this isn't about theory. This is about selective enforcement with a zip code bias. That line? It didn't just land. It detonated. The prosecutor squirmed in his seat. The court reporter stopped typing. The officer near the door suddenly became very interested in the fire extinguisher. You slapped a $20,000 fine on my front porch like it was a parking ticket. No hearing. No inspection. Just a letter with my name misspelled and the threat of seizure. She let the moment breathe. Then, softly but with steel, you don't want justice, Judge. You want obedience. And unfortunately for you, I'm too old and too damn tired to play docile. Judge Harlan leaned back like he was still in control, as if the weight of his title could hide the cracks in his authority. But everyone in the room felt it. The robe was heavy. The throne was wobbling. Ms. Jackson, he said through clenched teeth, the city has the right to revise zoning codes in the interest of urban modernization. Erlene didn't blink. And plantations had the right to tax freedom as lost labor. Doesn't make it justice, darling. The gallery froze. A few younger attorneys in the back exchanged glances that said, Is this history class? A revolution? A TED Talk with soul? Erlene flipped to the next page in her folder. This here is a picture of my porch in 1991. See that awning? Same one. See that child with the afro and the juice box? That's my son. He's a nurse now. He paid his way through school by working 2 jobs. That awning kept us dry, kept the sun off his face. But today, y'all say it's a threat to architectural cohesion. She held the picture high. You know what really disrupts the neighborhood aesthetic? A liquor store across the street from a daycare. But that didn't violate your vibe, did it? Now, even the clerk looked away. You want uniformity? She continued. Fine. I'll knock it down. Paint the whole house beige. Rip out the garden. Replace my hydrangeas with gravel and shame. But let's be real honest. What you want isn't design conformity. She paused. And then she cut. You want a neighborhood full of people who look like they don't have memories. That line cracked the room open. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It echoed in the bones of every person who ever watched their block change street names before it changed mayors. Judge Harlan adjusted his tie, the fabric now clinging like guilt. The city's goal is revitalization, he offered weakly. Revitalization, Erlene echoed. You mean displacement with a mural and a yoga studio? She smiled, but it was the kind of smile you see on a chess player right before the queen strikes. Let me tell you something, Judge. My house may not have granite countertops or recessed lighting, but it's got history. My husband built that porch with his own hands. He died on that porch. And the city sent me a fine like it was a parking ticket on his grave. No one dared interrupt. Not the prosecutor. Not the bailiff. Not even Harlan. You want to clean up the neighborhood? Start with the people sending fines to the elderly without inspections, hearings, or decency. Start with the folks calling heritage blight and culture non-compliant. She stepped forward. No notes. No fear. Just truth sharpened to a blade. Because this code violation ain't about wood and nails. It's about control. And you, judge, are trying to be an architect of silence. Let me guess, Erlene said, eyes fixed on Harlan like a hawk watching a worm squirm in a suit. If I paint my porch white, swap my wind chimes for minimalist succulents, and install a Ring doorbell, suddenly I'm a model citizen? Judge Harlan didn't answer, but his silence said, "You're not wrong." He adjusted his robe again, like a man trying to armor himself with fabric while his power leaked through the seams. "Ms. Jackson, this hearing is not the venue for personal frustrations," he muttered. Erlene's laugh was quiet, dangerously so. The kind of laugh women like her have earned after decades of being told to wait their turn in lines that never moved. "Oh, this ain't frustration, Your Honor. This is the diagnosis. And what I'm seeing is terminal." The gallery stirred, not with noise but with awareness. A white-haired man in the back straightened his tie. A Latina woman too rose up, slowly nodded. A young law student scribbled the word diagnosis in his notebook like it was scripture. Erlene pulled another document from her folder and raised it slowly. "Here's something interesting," she said. 3 homes. Same block. It has the same awning design. Mine got fined $20,000. The one 2 doors down, no fine. The one across the street got a commendation for historical charm. She dropped the documents on the table like lead. "And wanna guess the difference between those homeowners and me?" Harlan tried to speak, but she didn't let him. "I'll save you the trouble. They're white. Their porches are quaint. Mine? A violation." The temperature dropped. Even the bailiff looked like he wanted to crawl into the floorboards and apologize for the government. "You call this justice," she said, stepping closer to the bench. "I call it gentrification with a gavel." That hit hard. The prosecutor whispered something to his assistant. Probably a prayer. The gallery didn't move. "You want to talk about law? Fine. Let's talk precedent," Erlene continued. "Because what you're doing ain't new. It's just it used to be folks like me who got run off with torches. Now you do it with font size 12, Times New Roman, and a forged smile." She turned to face the gallery. "This isn't a court. It's a funnel, designed to drain dignity from those who can't afford lawyers, who don't speak city code, who still think justice means something." She turned back. "You didn't find a porch, Judge. You find a woman for refusing to disappear quietly." She raised her voice, slowly, evenly, like an anthem. "I will not go quietly. I will not pay for making you uncomfortable. And I will not shrink, so your system feels bigger." The room was still. Judge Harlan? He looked like a man staring into a mirror and not liking what he saw. Judge Harlan sat frozen, as if silence could reverse time and dignity could be duct-taped back onto his bench. But silence couldn't save him now, because Erlene Mae Jackson wasn't here to plead. She was here to pull the fire alarm on a system that had been quietly burning people like her for decades. "So let's skip the dance, Your Honor," she said, calm as a storm cloud. "You and I both know this fine was never about safety, never about structure. It was about getting rid of me, politely." She reached into her folder and pulled out receipts. Actual city citations, all dated within the last 24 months. Each one a scar. "I filed a FOIA request. Got a nice stack of violations issued under Code 47A. Want to hear something funny?" No one answered. They didn't have to. Out of 147 citations filed under 47A, 132 were issued in historically black neighborhoods. "Want to guess how many in the upscale district where your niece owns that bakery with $9 cupcakes?" She paused. Waited. 0. The word hit like a sniper round. Quiet. Precise. Deadly. "Now, I'm no lawyer," she said. "But even a squirrel can spot when the nuts ain't falling evenly." The prosecutor shifted in his seat like the chair had just turned to lava. The clerk suddenly found the floor tiles fascinating. And the gallery? They were no longer spectators. They were jurors. "What y'all are running here ain't a courtroom. It's a punishment assembly line. Same system. Same signature. Same result. People like me getting steamrolled by policy wearing cologne." She held up a photo. A small, one-story home. Paint peeling, yes, but flowers still blooming along the fence. A handwritten sign taped to the door reads, "Do not demolish. My grandchildren live here." This was Mrs. Laverne's house, Erlene said. She got fined for a loose gutter, missed one hearing because she was in the hospital. They auctioned her house 6 days later. She placed the photo on the judge's bench like a tombstone. That's not enforcement. That's administrative euthanasia. The room trembled. Not physically, but morally. The walls weren't cracked, but the conscience of that courtroom was splitting open like dry wood. Judge Harlan's mouth opened, but all that came out was a whisper of control, hollow and late. "Ms. Jackson, this court retains discretionary power under city statute, and I retain my right to call that bull." It wasn't a shout. It didn't have to be. It was truth, unfiltered and legally flammable. You think robes make gods, but when gods start signing eviction notices, they're just landlords with better PR. Even the stenographer stopped typing for half a second, unsure whether to write it down or frame it. "You tried to find my silence, but today," Erlene stepped forward. "Today, I invoice your system with interest." Judge Harlan cleared his throat like a man trying to find authority between the ruins of his own reputation. "Ms. Jackson, it's unfortunate that you feel. Erlene cocked her head, the smile gone, the heat now pure frost. "Sir, I feel arthritis when I garden. I feel the cold in my knees before the weatherman says rain. What am I showing you now? That's not a feeling. That's a pattern." She slapped down a fresh sheet of paper, each page a receipt of silence. Dozens of fines. Same neighborhoods. Same codes. It's the same fast-tracked hearings, where no one ever seems to win. And the same 3 words at the bottom of every citation. "No appeal allowed." The gallery murmured, low, angry, "Awakening." Harlan tried to interject. "That's city policy under expedited enforcement protocols." "Expedited?" she snapped. "You mean shortcutting due process so it looks efficient while being just unconstitutional enough to fly under the radar?" She stepped forward. "You've turned the law into a vending machine of suffering. Insert poor black homeowner, push a button, out pops a fine, a lien, a foreclosure, and a real estate agent with a clipboard asking if the property's move-in ready." The prosecutor looked like he was trying to crawl into his briefcase. "You know how many of my neighbors fought back?" she asked the room. "None. Not because they didn't want to, but because y'all built a system so tangled, God himself would need a permit to part it." Gasped. "Real ones." From the back of the room, even the bailiff gave a side-eye nod like, "Okay, that one hurt." Erlene took a breath, then held up a photo. A woman, black and white image, tired eyes, frail hands, sitting on a stoop. A paper notice taped to the door behind her. "This is Ms. Alberta. Lived on my street for 47 years. Got cited for a non-standard railing on her porch stairs. The city mailed the violation to the wrong address. When she found out, her house had already been sold to a developer. They gave her a bus voucher and called it Resolution." She turned back to Harlan. "And you signed off on it, like it was just a form, just another signature." The courtroom wasn't breathing now. It was holding its collective soul hostage. "You don't need bulldozers anymore," Erlene said. "Y'all learned to evict people with printers." She laid the photo of Ms. Alberta on the judge's bench. "Not for evidence. For accountability. You wrote me a fine. I brought you a funeral." She leaned in. "And don't think for 1 second I came alone." The back doors of the courtroom creaked open. Click, click, click. Heels against marble. A woman entered. Black, sharp suit, federal badge. Erlene didn't even turn around. "That's Ms. Rochelle DuVernay," she said. "Civil rights oversight. Seems somebody sent her a copy of this urban consistency circus." Judge Harlan paled. He hadn't just lost the room. He'd summoned the reckoning himself. Ms. Rochelle DuVernay didn't speak. She didn't have to. The gold badge clipped to her lapel said more than any gavel ever could. She took a seat in the front row with the elegance of someone who knew they belonged everywhere they walked. Then she opened a leather-bound notebook. Click. The sound of her pen echoed louder than anything Harlan had said all day. Erlene smiled without turning. Funny thing about systems like this, they run real smooth. Right up until someone presses record. The judge's hands twitched. Not clenched. Not steady. Just twitching. Like the authority had leaked out of him and was pooling on the courtroom floor. You see, I didn't just bring receipts, Erlene continued. I brought witnesses. She turned slowly toward the gallery, eyes scanning the rows. Mrs. Hartley, front row, got fined for a chipped step. Her husband had a stroke the same week they got the citation. Mrs. Hartley nodded, fists clenched around a tissue. Mr. Duval, third row, got a letter about his fence being an inch too high. Lost the appeal because they said the tape measure wasn't calibrated. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled like wind across a field of dry truth. Y'all ever wonder why so many of us stop fighting? Erlene asked. Because this system is like a carnival mirror. It makes the people it crushes look small, foolish, undeserving. She held up a list. These are names. Not code violators. Not line items. Not neighborhood blemishes. People. And every one of them got chewed up by this machine. Judge Harlan cleared his throat. Ms. Jackson, this is not. What? Not the place. Not the time. She cut in. Tell that to the families who got eviction notices with spelling errors. To the seniors who paid $500 a month in fines until they couldn't afford insulin. She stepped forward again, slow, steady. You fine us in silence. You evict us in silence. You erase us in silence. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried like a prayer-turn protest. But today you don't get silence. Today you get names, and stories, and one very expensive spotlight. Ms. DuVernay looked up from her notebook, eyes sharp. Please continue, Ms. Jackson, she said. Everything you say is now part of an official federal review. Boom. The sound of panic rose, not from Erlene, but from the court's foundation. The prosecutor reached for a water bottle with trembling hands. The clerk stopped typing and started sweating. And Judge Harlan? He stared at Erlene like he'd just realized he was no longer the one on trial. You built this machine to run without friction, she said. But I've got grit in my soul, Your Honor. And then, so soft it felt sacred. And grit ruins gears. Judge Harlan sat stiffly, posture perfect like he thought good posture could still save him. Spoiler alert, it couldn't. Across from him, Erlene Mae Jackson stood like a woman who'd already won, just waiting for the court to catch up. Ms. DuVernay continued scribbling notes with all the calm precision of someone building a federal case file with your name on it. The room was still, the oxygen thin, and then Erlene struck again. You know what the most dangerous word in this courtroom is, Judge? She didn't wait for an answer. Discretion. The gallery shifted. Erlene held up a stack of citations like a dealer about to end the game. That word has been used to excuse bias, bury truth, and bulldoze lives. Discretion is how you give warnings to the golf instructor with the beer fridge in his garage, and fines to the widow with chipped paint. Her voice turned to velvet dipped in venom. Discretion is what makes my porch a violation, and my neighbors a charming accent. She turned to the audience again, scanning the faces that had once come to sit quietly and accept their sentence. Y'all hear me? They don't need new laws to push us out. They just twist the old ones until they only bend in one direction. A young black man in the third row whispered, "Damn!" An elderly woman clutched her purse like it was the last anchor in a rising flood of truth. Judge Harlan finally spoke, voice cracking like a dry branch. Municipal enforcement is not inherently discriminatory. Spare me the inherently. Erlene cut in. That's law school for we did it. But you can't prove intent. Even Ms. DuVernay paused her pen to glance up and smile. Let's talk numbers, Erlene said, flipping to the next tab in her folder. 43 citations in the last year, fast-tracked through your court, all rubber-stamped within 48 hours. All in historically black neighborhoods. No hearings, no photos, no evidence beyond someone's visual assessment. She tapped the folder. I know because I've read every one of them. 3 cups of coffee, 1 bad knee, and a hell of a lot more backbone than your entire code enforcement department. The gallery laughed quietly, bitterly, but real. You've turned enforcement into a shortcut, a vending machine for property turnover. Push a button, take a house, blame the form. She took one final step toward the bench, not threatening, just precise. You said I was non-compliant, but you never defined with what. She looked around the room. Let me tell you what I'm not compliant with. Silence, shame, and systems that think they can outlast memory. The judge didn't reply, because when your robe starts to feel like a noose, there's no script left. This isn't just my house, Your Honor, she said. It's my history, my neighborhood, my damn birthright. And with that, Erlene placed the final sheet on the bench. A formal request for federal inquiry. Stamped. Filed. Unignorable. Judge Harlan sat motionless. A man suddenly realizing his courtroom had turned into a coffin, and he was the one being buried alive. The gavel sat in his hand like a relic from a time when people still feared him. But now, even the gavel looked embarrassed to be there. Across the room, Erlene stood tall, spine straight, folder closed. Not because she was finished, but because she didn't need to say anything else to win. She had already torched the illusion of fairness. Your Honor, the prosecutor stammered, voice small and sweatier than legal ethics allowed. Given the severity of these developments, perhaps we should adjourn and… No, Erlene cut in, her voice like a blade slicing paper. You didn't pause when you found me. Didn't pause when you scheduled this circus at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, hoping I wouldn't show. You don't get to pause now. The gallery was dead silent, but not out of fear, out of respect. Even Ms. DuVernay leaned forward, pen resting on her pad like it wanted to clap. Erlene reached into her purse one last time and pulled out a single sheet of paper, thicker than the rest. This is a notice of class action, she said. Filed yesterday. Certified. Active. She laid it on the bench like a final nail in the coffin. Over 40 plaintiffs. All victims of fines under your expedited docket. All with documented patterns of discriminatory enforcement. All now part of a very public federal lawsuit. Judge Harlan's throat clicked. The sound of a man swallowing the last drop of plausible deniability. Erlene took a breath. Not to calm herself. To savor this moment. You wanted to make an example out of me, she said. Well, congratulations. Now you're in the syllabus. Gasped. Someone in the gallery muttered, God damn. The court reporter stopped typing, unsure if it was physically possible to transcribe a mic drop. You tried to make me a statistic, Erlene said, quieter now. Instead, I became a headline. She turned to Ms. DuVernay. The Office of Civil Rights will have my full cooperation. Every file, every name, every home you tried to erase with a clipboard. Ms. DuVernay nodded, her expression unreadable but her eyes glowing with the sharpness of justice finally waking up. The prosecutor sat down, defeated. The clerk closed her laptop, slowly, like a curtain falling on a failed magician. And Judge Harlan? His fingers finally moved. He reached for the gavel, then stopped, because even he knew, what's the point of a gavel when nobody believes the sound anymore? Erlene looked at him one last time. You don't get to rule from a throne built on sand, sir. And today, the tide came in. And then, she sat, not in retreat, but in finality. The room stayed frozen, because they weren't just witnessing a dismissal. They were witnessing a dethroning. The courtroom didn't applaud. It didn't need to, because what had just unfolded wasn't a victory, it was a public exorcism. Of power, of rot, of a system that had long confused silence with consent. Judge Harlan sat hunched, gavel untouched. His voice, once booming with arrogance, now barely clung to syllables. This court finds that the enforcement action brought against Ms. Erlene Jackson lacks sufficient evidentiary basis to sustain the penalty. He looked down, like the words tasted like betrayal on his tongue. The fine is vacated. All charges are dismissed. And still, he didn't bang the gavel. Because even he knew, the gavel didn't belong to him anymore. Erlene didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't offer a single "I told you so." She stood with the quiet poise of a woman who had walked through hell in orthopedic shoes and come out the other side holding receipts. She gathered her folder, her purse, her cane. Then she turned to the gallery. The very people this court had tried to break for years with clipboards, code numbers, and cold mailboxes. "This wasn't just about a porch," she said, steady. "It was about a place. A place they didn't want us to have anymore." She scanned the faces. "They used fines to move us out, but I used truth to move them back." And then she looked at Judge Harlan. Not with hatred, but with something worse for a man like him: pity. "You thought I'd be a footnote, but I became your forward. And now, Judge, your legacy is a cautionary tale." Ms. DuVernay closed her notebook, stood, and spoke for the first time since the ruling. "The Department of Civil Rights will begin an audit of this court's citation history, enforcement patterns, and expedited hearing process." She turned to Harlan. "Effective immediately. Translation: you're not just done. You're archived." Erlene walked toward the exit, each tap of her cane a metronome counting down the end of an era. Click, click, click. Outside the courthouse, the air was different. The sky is brighter, as if the city itself had taken a deep, shameful breath. Reporters had gathered. Cameras waited. But Erlene didn't stop, because this was never about her. It was about everyone they'd tried to erase in silence. And now, silence had a voice. In the weeks that followed, fines were overturned, citations retracted, lawsuits launched, and policies rewritten by officials who suddenly remembered what public service was supposed to mean. Law schools added the case to their curriculum. The media called it the Porch Rebellion. In neighborhoods once targeted by code enforcement, porches became symbols, decorated with flowers, lights, signs that read, "We're still here." Erlene's name, once misspelled, mocked, ignored, was now a movement. She didn't just beat the system. She documented it, dismantled it, and left it begging for mercy. All with a cane, a folder, and a voice that refused to whisper. Some stories end with applause. Others end with paperwork. But this one, it ends with a mirror, held up to a system that thought no one would ever dare to look. Erlene didn't just fight a fine. She exposed a formula. Silence plus power plus policy equals disappearance. But she rewrote the equation. Because when the system forgets who it's supposed to serve, when discretion becomes discrimination in a necktie, and when the law becomes theater with no script for justice, takes one voice, one folder, one woman with a spine of steel, and that voice could be yours next. So, if you've ever felt like the rules weren't written for people like you, if you've seen a neighbor pushed out, a family buried in bureaucracy, or wondered why justice feels so expensive, then subscribe to this channel. Story Precious isn't just a name, it's a promise. We don't just tell stories. We uncover what power wants to forget. And we do it with fire, truth, and just the right amount of sarcasm. Like, share, subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but for the people who were never supposed to be heard.